who's supposed to be.
So I'm wondering, like, how do you think we should be classifying bipolar disorder? Because to me, there's like two separate ends of the spectrum. So should we think of it as one illness or as like a comorbidity of multiple illnesses?
That's interesting. I'll answer what I think and then you'll say, just so I can get it out. You can have manic and depressive episodes at the same time. They're whole mixed episodes. I don't think they're two separate things. I think because you have that kind of polar opposite experience of manic episodes along with major depression makes it unique, and I think it also makes it a type of incapacity to regulate, like an extreme capacity to regulate, going from a total low to a total high. But I don't know.
I thought he was asking if bipolar 1 and 2 should be considered one disorder, but that's not what he was.
Were you asking that?
To an extent, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I thought he was asking what you answered. So
yeah, you answered it pretty well.
So you're talking about mania versus hypomania? Like in bipolar 1 and bipolar 2?
Mania versus depression.
yeah, that's what.
Yeah.
Oh, like they just have a depressive disorder and they also have a manic disorder, but they're not.
Well, yeah, because we have like depressive disorders, but there's not like a lot of talk of manic disorders.
It's weird because they call it bipolar even if all you have is manic disorder.
Well, yeah,
I've always thought that was odd.
Because it's uncommon to just have mania in and of itself. You would generally have mania, which would fall, it's like being on coke and then having a crash and go into depression from it. Think of it that way. So there's but most of the time you're going to fall into a depression after a manic episode, yes.
Well, don't you call just mania psychosis? But I mean, when you're presented to the ER with a manic episode there, so they say you have psychosis, but then they do testing to see if it's bipolar.
Well, if you're manic enough, well, psychosis is just generally the loss of touch of reality. That's generally what it means. With mania, and that's why you have bipolar 1 and 2, is the difference between them is bipolar 1, the severe form, is more, you're going to be able to have manic psychotic episodes. Whereas hypomania, you'll be manic, but you won't be psychotic. So that's the differentiation between the two, I think.
So did it say that the amygdala, it wasn't related to anything going on with bipolar?
Yeah, at least in this study, they didn't find volume increases or decreases in the amygdala, and it wasn't related to any cognitive. I saw someone mentioned something about the fact that people with bipolar have or tend to also have anxiety disorders. I can't remember who it was. So the fact that, and they also mentioned that the amygdala is related to anxiety, so I think it was about panic.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. I was asking basically, seeing his previous study was talking about a little bit about the amygdala and how, I think it was like one of the first studies I read. It was talking about how the amygdala is associated with panic attacks and the inhibition of panic attacks. And so that's what I was saying, if it's enlarged, then why doesn't it inhibit instead of, I guess, trigger more anxiety?
Yeah. I don't know if the volume is necessarily related to that more than the activation of it, and I don't think I've seen studies, at least in bipolar disorder, talking about amygdala activation or irregular activation. But I mean, what do you think?
I don't know. I was also thinking about it's probably more the activation instead of the actual volume, which is, I don't know, typically when you have something more of something, that's usually going to trigger bigger effects. But
that is the underlying kind of unspoken assumption, I think, in a lot of these studies, is that if you're losing gray matter, that means that there's less functioning going on in that area, or if you're gaining gray matter, there's more functioning going on in that area. But I guess those two things really probably are related, but they wouldn't necessarily be 100% related. Of course, on the other hand, why would you get a growth in a certain area? I mean, what's our normal stimulus for growth in the brain? Use, right? If we don't use it, we lose it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting, I think, an empirical question to see how well the size of the amygdala correlates with the level of activation of the amygdala. I don't know if anybody's ever actually done that research. Seems like they probably have.
Yeah, and I was thinking the same thing, further finding where they found hippocampal gray matter loss, but it wasn't related to memory function, so.
Yeah, that sort of implies that the cells that are still there must be working overtime. If there's no loss
And it
in
could
function, even though you've lost tissue.
Yeah, and it could be like an overactive processing, emotion processing. I know it's, since it's involved in that. So.
Just speak up.
So I was wondering, as far as like the difference in how they saw a difference in like a gray matter volume, but they didn't really see a significant difference in white matter volume. Is it possible to have like more myelination of the same number of neurons, or does more white matter volume automatically correlate with more axons in general?
Oh, that's a really
Like, could it be
question.
either one, or does it?
I do not know the answer to that. Like, I wonder if there's some, like, if you
Because then it-
stimulate the oligodendrocytes, like, get all beefed up and everything.
Yeah, because then all this other stuff would kind of make sense, because like if those axons that are still there, even though there's fewer of them, are just better myelinated, maybe that's why the hippocampus doesn't, the shrunken hippocampus doesn't relate to memory loss, because it works more.
Yeah, and it can still communicate with.
I'm putting that on my list of things to look up when I'm really old and don't have anything else to do,
That'll never happen.
which will be sometime later this week. So I have a question. What did you say that the range of the number of manic episodes was 1 to 6 during this period of time? Hmm?
6 plus. I think it was.
Could you go back to that? I was curious about this. There it is.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. So there's a range of 0 to 6 episodes during this 4-year period, and the average was 1. So that means that there were a lot of people who had 0 or 1, and probably not too many people that had 6. So based on what you've learned in your statistics classes, that seems like not the most ideal conditions for a correlation to be really valid, because you've got a lot of people down at the bottom without a whole lot of numbers, and then a few people at the other end. So I wondered about that. Did they mention that, say anything about that? Yeah. So not that I'm saying it's invalid, but it is a little bit less dependable than it would be if it had more of a range of numbers. So that was something that I thought about, and I wondered, this is a reality of doing research on real people with real problems. You can't get them to have the correct number of problems that you need them to have in order to do a really good study on the problem. So it's not really a flaw in the study, it's just kind of a problem with reality, I would say. But it did make me want to know more about exactly how it looked in a more sort of granular way. The other thing that I thought was interesting about this is it seemed like they're saying, as I am remembering, that the medications for bipolar aren't associated with changes in the brain?
Yeah.
In general, or just in this study?
Just in this study.
In this study.
I didn't see anything that specifically looked at medication changes in structures, but lithium seems to do good for people with bipolar, even though it's a pretty harsh.
Yeah, you can die from it.
Yeah, I mean.
But the reason that you die from it is because it throws off your body chemistry. It's really a very strange thing, the way it was discovered, and the fact that it works is still a total mystery. It's not understood how it really does what it does. But I just thought it was interesting because it seems like, if I remember from last week, the medications for schizophrenia cause a lot of brain issues.
Yeah, they were saying there was like a roller coaster effect when it comes down to that where you go, you're on it all the way up until you're getting ready to die, where you start having the shakes, and then they take you off of it until you're getting ready to go all the way back into it, and then they put you back on it. So it's no matter what, you're actually taking medication that will ultimately kill you.
Yeah, it seems like it's interesting to me that the medications are that different in the effects they have on the brain. Now, obviously, they're different medications, but I just thought that was worth thinking about.
Yeah, I don't think they mentioned how long they had been taking any medications, if they...
Well, they've probably been taking it for quite a while if they've been diagnosed, because, hopefully anyway.
Yeah.
There's one other thing that, and this is an issue that I have with a lot of research in general, is that I don't know if this is anything that came from the paper because I don't remember, but when you have a cross-sectional study, that means you're measuring everybody at the same time. So if you have a group of so-called normal people and a group of patients, and you measure brain volume in a particular area, and it differs between those two groups, can you say that there's a change in brain volume associated with the difference between those groups? You really can't say that because you haven't measured the brains in these people once and then measured them again. So you don't know if there's a change or not. All you can say is that there's a difference in the brain volumes between the two groups. In this study, they measured the brain twice, so they could actually say whether there was a change. And that's really good. That's the value of longitudinal research. But when you just compare two groups at any given time, you have no way of knowing whether the difference between those is because one group changed from how it used to be or not. You just can't say. But a lot of times when people talk about results like that, they'll say changes or increases. There were increases in this group compared to this group. Not an increase, just a difference. It was bigger in this group than it was in that group. It's different from saying there's an increase in this group compared to that group. And that happens all the time. So you should think about the results you're reading. You have to think about the design of the study to understand whether the claims that they appear to be making are actually accurate. So I really like this study because it actually was a longitudinal study. And that's really valuable.
Yeah, and most of the participants were pretty stable during the 4-year period. Something also that I just kind of noticed was that, at least in what they reported in the paper, they didn't, I mean, I know they don't really say much about the controls because they're the control group, but it'd be interesting to know also in both the bipolar patients and the controls if they might have had any kind of social trauma or major life events, because those can influence at least genetic risks for bipolar disorder, and I'm sure other mental illness expressions. So, you know, even though they mentioned how many episodes they had for the bipolar patients, you know, what if
Their lives are probably more stressful also.
yeah, or they're more sensitive to stress. So, does anybody think that could impact like structural changes or differences they might have seen if maybe they are more sensitive to stress? How would that affect their illness?
I feel like if they're more sensitive to stress, they're more susceptible to bipolar disorder if it's already kind of in their genes, I guess. Just because stressors can lead to it more than if you have a stable life.
Yeah, and even if it's not, if it is or not related to their expression or onset of the illness, it's definitely related to how many episodes they experience. So, and the more episodes they experience, particularly manic episodes, the kind of worse off they are. So, it's kind of also interesting to think about like how they cope.
I remember mentioning in there that helping that cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy helps people with bipolar only in the sense that it helps them manage stress better so they are less likely to have an episode, but it doesn't really affect the illness itself. I thought that was kind of interesting too. So,
Which does
like
affect
depression.
prognosis. Yeah, so it might not necessarily, I mean, having the disorder seems to affect any structural changes that happen, but it's definitely how many episodes you have or the severity of the illness. So, yeah.
I think it's interesting because I've read something before where they said medication works, but it's not the only thing that you should be doing if you have bipolar disorder. You should be going to therapy too, and I talked to a psychiatrist about this as well. And it's probably because of maintaining that stability of your emotions, because that's what can trigger another manic episode or a depressive state. So it's just learning how to cope, I guess.
helps. Okay, well, thank you very much.
There are a couple more hands.
Oh, there are? Where?
Well, they both went at the same time, so.
On the ends of people's arms?
I was just kind of wondering about how the gray matter loss in the cerebellum contributes to like what specific symptoms of bipolar, if like you knew anything about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. They didn't hypothesize any changes, but they found them.
Because I know it said that there was like a correlation between the number of manic and hypomanic episodes that occurred during the period of follow-up that correlated with the gray matter loss in the cerebellar and the temporal lobe. I was just wondering what specific symptoms that would lead to.
Yeah, I really didn't see much research talking about the cerebellum with bipolar. It mostly focuses on like the hippocampus, the amygdala, the medial temporal lobe structures. So, yeah.
So I'm looking at this article. This is like a news article about this, and it says whatever the this is a quote from a scientist. Whatever the cerebellum is doing, it's doing a lot of it. So let's see. Let's see whatever it is, it's really doing a lot of it. Oh yes. Still don't know.
Do you have any guesses? Has anyone else?
So I was wondering, like, what influence culture would have on bipolar disorder, because I know it's schizophrenia. Like, comparing here and India, there's a better prognosis because, like, they do have auditory hallucinations, but, like, as opposed to here, they're actually much more positive, and they're like spiritual guides. You're seeing more spiritual guides, and I'm just wondering how it might affect bipolar disorder, And like maybe in the connections in the brain or
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure how it could affect like structural changes or physical symptoms, but I definitely can imagine it affecting like their coping skills or how sensitive they are to stress. Yeah, it's interesting to think about like emotion regulation and its relationship to culture in this context, considering this is kind of a dysfunction in regulation. So considering like how they regulate, like in terms of behaviorally or physiologically. I wonder if like people who maybe in collectivistic cultures who tend to like suppress more, if that would affect like the severity of the episodes they have or the frequency.
or like in I believe Scandinavian cultures where they're told you shouldn't be too happy, you should like
Maybe they're trying to I'm just kidding. That's me. Does anybody have any kind of additional thoughts on that? So no one cares about culture.
Sasha cares about culture.
Yeah.
I think for cultural, yes, you have to look at the depressive side more because not every culture experiences depression the same way.
Do you know how they differ?
No, I just know that some cultures don't really experience depression at all.
And that could also be, maybe they just don't report it. Maybe they don't report symptoms.
So I looked up the cerebellum and psychiatric disorders, and there's a review article published in 2015 that says that there's now research suggesting that the cerebellum is messed up one way or another in ADHD, autism, schizophrenia, bipolar, major depressive, and anxiety disorders. So whatever it's doing a lot of it in all of these different disorders. But I haven't read the article. It's a long article, so I don't know. The only quick thing I could say is that in the past we thought the cerebellum was about motor coordination. That was kind of the idea that I learned when I was you guys' age. And now there's evidence that it's involved in cognitive and emotional processes also. And the suggestion is that it may be helpful in controlling purposive activity. So like if you're trying to direct your attention at something, maybe your cerebellum is involved in helping you actually direct your attention. Or if you're trying to control your emotions, maybe it's helpful in directing your efforts towards controlling. So that's sort of like a general idea, but I don't think the answer is there yet. So I never would have thought of that in a million years. So that's kind of cool, actually. And as far as the cultural thing, I do think that, from my understanding, it's not that different cultures don't have psychiatric disorders. It's that because of the different ways that people behave in different cultures, and the values and sort of habits of thought they have, that the manifestations of those disorders may differ from culture to culture. So when you say that a certain culture doesn't experience depression, if what you mean is they don't manifest depression the way Americans do, then that fits with what I know, but they might have some other manifestation of a mood disorder that's different from what we wouldn't call it depression, we might call it something else because we wouldn't know. Yeah?
What I was reading just now, and it was saying that basically people in India, they say they have a wide range of distress disorders that are categorized as depressive disorders. but people in Japan are basically listed that they don't, but they say the very idea of mental illnesses are unacceptable, so they're not necessarily reported because it's considered to be unacceptable. But it was saying also, for example, in the United States, black women tend to have lower rates of depression than white women. So it could basically, as a result, just because of culture, you're less likely, or the people who are surrounding you, or the dynamics of your particular culture. So, yeah.
Well, what I was thinking about in relation to, somebody said like collectivistic, like, you know, versus individualistic, and I feel like in a more collectivistic culture, like if you are starting to feel symptoms of, you know, bipolar or like a depressive episode or something, it might not be so much, you might not feel so much like it's a reflection of you as much as, okay, these are my experiences, you know, because you're not so much as focused on, you know.
You might get more support too.
Yeah. So I feel like just the reaction of the community to, you know, those types of emotions might affect, you know, because if you think like something's wrong with me, why am I feeling this, you know, it's just going to be a steeper slope, you know, to fall into it. Whereas if you think of it more of, okay, I've had some bad experiences, I'm feeling kind of sad right now, but with my community behind me, like I can, you know, go through this, like it just won't, I don't know, get as bad, I guess.
Yeah. And in terms of like their manic episodes, I wonder if that could influence, you know, how extreme they are. Like maybe, I mean, they most likely aren't thinking about the consequences of their actions, but maybe, you know, back in their mind, like, oh, this could affect my family if they're like in a